What's one family saying or phrase you heard growing up that still sticks with you?
My graduation row was empty. Dead empty. Like a damn movie scene where everyone else gets flowers and I get the ghost section. And I'll be real with you, I expected it. But it still hit like a brick. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I looked right into that Livestream camera and said, "Thanks for never believing in me." And walked off. Hours later, my aunt was crying in my DMs, my brother was calling me ungrateful, and my mom just wrote, "Why would you embarrass us like that?" So now I've got one question for you. What would you do if your family gave up on you before you even started? Would you take them back? Or make them wish they never pushed you away in the first place? Let me tell you what I did. See, some kids grow up with a soft landing. Not me. I grew up in a house where praise was a currency, and I never had enough to even buy a damn compliment. From the moment I could spell my name, I knew I didn't fit the Turner family mold. My brother Jake was the blueprint: high school football, average grades, and a wide grin that made our mom melt like microwaved butter. And me? I was the girl who read too much, asked too many questions, and didn't smile on command. I still remember my mom's voice during dinner when I brought home a science fair ribbon in 6th grade. "That's cute, but don't be getting big-headed about it," she said, while Jake chewed with his mouth open, telling us how he managed a B- in gym. That earned a standing ovation. I wasn't angry yet, I was too young. But I was confused, and that confusion grew up with me like a twin I never asked for. As I got older, that silence turned into noise, a noise that sounded a lot like, "Why can't you just be normal like your brother?" Or, "Books won't get you a job, sweetie." I kept my mouth shut. For a while. I let it build. You know that feeling when you're sitting in the same room with people who talk around you like you're a piece of furniture? That was every damn day of my teenage years. I could be sitting 2 feet away and still be treated like some intern in her own family. No eye contact. No follow-up questions. Just cold indifference and the occasional passive-aggressive jab if I dared to speak up about anything that mattered to me. I wanted to be a teacher. I remember when I said that out loud at the dinner table, just once, like testing the air. My father, who rarely spoke unless he was yelling about the cable bill, looked at me and said, "You're gonna teach? Who the hell wants to learn from someone like you?" And my mom didn't even blink. She just kept chewing. That was the night I realized I was completely on my own. The weird thing is, I didn't even hate them back then. I just assumed something was wrong with me. I thought maybe I was hard to love, or too opinionated, or not as charming as Jake, who had this effortless way of getting exactly what he wanted while doing the bare minimum. And it wasn't like he was cruel. No, that would have made him easier to dismiss. He was worse, he was indifferent, always grinning that soft, smug smile while telling me, "You overthink everything," like my brain was a broken faucet that just needed tightening. So, I kept my plans to myself. I worked part-time at a diner 2 towns over, lying about what I needed the money for. Said it was for car stuff when I didn't even own a car. I'd take the bus to the community college library, bury myself in textbooks until the last train home. I applied to scholarships in secret, forged my mom's signature on the FAFSA forms, and told my family I was just working after high school. They didn't ask questions. Why would they? I was already the forgettable one, the mistake they didn't bother fixing. But I'll tell you what, those quiet years, those long nights studying while everyone thought I was just slinging hash at the diner, they lit something in me. I wasn't trying to prove them wrong back then. I was just trying to prove to myself that maybe I wasn't as disposable as they made me feel. That maybe I could belong somewhere, even if it wasn't around our worn-out dining table. There was one time, though, when I almost told someone. It was the night before my final exams in my 2nd year. My roommate, Asha, who knew bits and pieces, came home to find me crying in the closet, not because I was failing, but because I had just passed a critical psych class with flying colors and had no one to call. Not a soul to say, "Hey, I did it." I remember she sat beside me in the dark, passed me a mug of warm wine, and whispered, "They'll regret this someday, you know." And I nodded, but deep down, I didn't believe they would. I figured people like my mom, like Jake, like half our family, didn't do regret. They just did denial and moved on like nothing ever happened. So when graduation day finally came, I wasn't expecting flowers or banners or one of those giant cardboard heads with my face on it like some of the other kids got. I just wanted one person in my row. One. But when I stepped into that auditorium, hair straightened, robe zipped, honors cord swaying in the air, I saw the truth hit me like a gut punch. My row was untouched. Not a jacket draped over a chair. Not a forgotten purse. Just 5 empty chairs, clean and cold, like placeholders for the people who never planned on showing up. The applause for other students hurt in a way I can't explain. It wasn't just about the absence. It was about confirmation. Confirmation that even now, even with a diploma in my hand and a future cracked wide open, they still didn't care. That I had climbed this whole damn mountain and no one even noticed I left the ground. And that's when it happened. The Livestream camera was scanning the room, panning over the rows of proud families. I saw the red light blink as it locked on me. And I swear, it felt like the one moment I was finally seen. So I did what no one expected. I looked straight into the lens, let the smile drop from my face, and said, in a voice I didn't recognize as my own, "Thanks for never believing in me." And then I walked off the stage. I didn't know then that I had just lit a fuse. I had no idea that one sentence would ripple through a family that had spent years pretending I didn't exist. But oh, it did. And if you think that was the moment I got my revenge, no. That was just me starting the fire. It's strange how silence can become a kind of armor, how after enough years of being ignored or dismissed or outright told that your ambitions were laughable, you start to believe that the best way to survive is to say nothing at all. To keep your dreams locked away where no one can reach them and ruin them with their smirks or backhanded compliments or that polite, disinterested nod that says, "Sure, honey, whatever helps you sleep at night." I learned early that speaking up in my house wasn't worth the energy it cost. Every time I let even a fragment of hope slip out, it was like tossing a balloon into traffic, watching it get crushed by someone else's reality. Usually my mother's or my brother's, who both seemed to think that wanting more out of life was some kind of personal insult against them. After that night at dinner, when I said I wanted to teach and my dad laughed in my face like I'd just announced I was moving to Mars, I stopped telling them anything that mattered. I nodded when they told me to be practical and find something realistic. I smiled when my brother joked that I'd end up managing the same diner I worked at, and I played along when my mom told the neighbors I was taking some time off after high school to figure myself out, like I was some kind of broken appliance with missing parts. But while they were busy writing me off, I was already halfway through my first semester of community college, sitting in lecture halls during the day, working double shifts at the diner most nights, and spending my weekends buried under textbooks, all while pretending I was just coasting through life like they assumed I would. I used every trick I had to keep it hidden. I kept my textbooks in the trunk of a friend's car. I did my online assignments in the break room on my phone, pretending to scroll through social media. I even paid for my tuition in cash, scraping together tips, working holidays, skipping meals, because if even one envelope came to the house from the school, I knew the whole damn illusion would come crashing down. And the truth was, I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing. Not yet. Not until I had something real in my hand. Not until I could prove, without any room for argument, that I had done the impossible, that I had built something out of the scraps they left me with. I don't think most people understand how lonely it is to chase something big in secret. There were nights I came home so tired I'd fall asleep in my work clothes, shoes still on, brain still buzzing with flashcards and lecture notes and the clatter of dishes. There were mornings I cried in the shower, quietly, so no one could hear, because the weight of pretending to be nothing while trying to become something was so heavy it felt like it was sinking me into the floor. But I kept going. I kept waking up. I kept studying. I kept working. I kept pretending. And somewhere along the way, that fire inside me stopped flickering and started to burn with something sharper, something that didn't care about applause or validation, something that only wanted to finish. By the time I applied to transfer to a 4-year college, I had already saved enough for one semester. I picked the school not for its name or reputation, but for one simple reason: it was far enough away that I could start over, and close enough that I didn't need to explain where I was going. I told my mom I was moving in with a friend to figure out my life, and she barely looked up from her crossword. Jake was busy packing for his own move, his girlfriend was pregnant, and they were getting a small apartment together in town, paid for by our uncle, who gave Jake money like it grew on trees. No one asked what I was planning to do. No one cared. And honestly, by then, I preferred it that way. College was harder. The classes were tougher, the bills bigger, the nights longer, but for the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who didn't know me as the disappointment. I was just Melissa, the girl who sat in the front row, who volunteered to lead group projects, who sometimes cried in the library, but always had her notes in perfect order. I made friends who didn't treat ambition like a disease. I found professors who took the time to write notes on my essays, who said things like, "You have a voice, and this could go somewhere." I worked 3 jobs at one point: campus library, grocery store on weekends, and tutoring at night, but I never missed a class, never skipped a deadline, and never once called home for help. When senior year came around, and I knew I was close, closer than I'd ever been to anything that felt like winning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to plead or remind them of who I was or what I'd done or why this mattered. I sent a single invitation to my family. I printed it out, hand wrote their names on the envelope, and mailed it from the student center. No note. No follow-up. Just a formal card with the date, time, and address of the graduation ceremony. I figured if they cared even a little, if there was one flicker of pride left in any of them, they'd show up. A week passed. Then 2. Then 3. Nothing. No text. No call. Not even a sarcastic message from Jake. My roommate, Asha, offered to come with me, to sit in the crowd, cheer when my name was called, take photos afterward. And I almost said yes. But then I realized I didn't want a pity audience. I didn't want someone to fill the seat just to make the picture look better. If my family didn't care enough to be there, then so be it. I'd walk across that stage with my head high and my row empty. I'd accept that diploma with silence ringing in my ears. Because deep down, part of me wanted it that way. I wanted them to miss it. I wanted them to feel the absence, the gap between what they thought I was and what I had become. I wanted that empty row to haunt them. And as the day got closer, as I picked up my cap and gown, tried it on in the mirror, and stared at the reflection of a woman who had dragged herself to this moment with no help, no applause, and no goddamn family, something in me shifted. The pain was still there, but under it, something colder was growing. Not bitterness. Not quite. It was something sharper, quieter, more controlled. The kind of feeling you get when you stop hoping someone will change and start planning what you're going to do after they don't. And so I waited. Not for them to come, but for the chance to show them without words, without shouting, without even raising my voice, just how wrong they had been. Because the best revenge I've learned isn't loud. It's quiet. It's calculated. It's standing in front of a full auditorium, your name echoing from the speakers, the spotlight on you, and 5 perfectly empty chairs behind you where the people who doubted you should have been. And that's exactly what was waiting for me. The auditorium was colder than I expected, not in temperature exactly, but in atmosphere, in that oddly sterile way big spaces feel when they're dressed up to seem important, yet the emptiness still leaks through the cracks, like when someone tries too hard to be warm and only makes the room more awkward. I stood just outside the double doors, robe ironed and zipped, cap pinned tightly to keep my curls from flying loose, clutching the flimsy plastic folder that would, in just a few minutes, hold the physical symbol of years of lonely effort, exhaustion, and silence that no one in my family had the decency to even pretend to notice. I kept glancing at the program, running my finger over the printed letters of my name as if trying to convince myself I'd actually made it here, that the world hadn't pulled a final cruel joke and erased my name from the list at the last second. When I finally walked inside, guided by some clipboard-holding volunteer in a headset who didn't know she was escorting a woman carrying an entire lifetime of betrayal on her back, I tried not to let my eyes wander toward the family section. But of course they did. They always do. Hope is the most disobedient part of the human body. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself I expected this. I told myself that I didn't need them and never had. But when I looked across the rows of proud mothers holding up handmade signs, Fathers in too tight suits with their phones raised like trophies, little siblings wearing "I'm with the graduate" shirts. I felt a raw, dull ache that throbbed behind my ribs like something old and wounded was waking up just to remind me it was still there. There they were, rows and rows of chairs packed with noise and joy and love I'd never tasted. And then there was mine, row H, seats 1 through 5 empty, untouched, with their stiff white program cards sitting lonely on the cushion like little paper lies. It was almost funny in the cruelest way, how the university had assumed I'd need all those seats, had printed the names from the RSVP list I'd filled out in the pitiful hope that someone, anyone, might surprise me. But of course they hadn't. Not my mother, whose last text to me was 2 weeks ago and just said, "Don't forget to return grandma's casserole dish." Not my brother, who had time to post half-naked gym selfies, but couldn't be bothered to acknowledge his only sister graduating summa cum laude. Not my aunt, who used to babysit me and braid my hair while promising I was special until I became too much work to love. I sat down alone, flanked on both sides by strangers flanked by family, and forced my face into a neutral expression that I'd spent years perfecting. It's the look you wear when you've had to get through birthdays without cake, when your high school graduation gift is a card with no money and a note inside that says "Don't get cocky," when every success is met with either silence or subtle sabotage. A few people glanced my way, probably wondering where my family was, maybe assuming I was an orphan or estranged or just unlucky, but no one asked. No one ever does. That's the thing about quiet suffering. It's easy to ignore. Names began echoing from the stage, one by one, each followed by a wave of cheers, claps, air horns, and camera flashes. I clapped when it felt right, smiled when someone looked at me, nodded politely when a stranger next to me said, "Congrats in advance." All the while, my heart was beating so loud it felt like it would crack open my chest. I wasn't nervous about walking. I wasn't worried about tripping or forgetting where to go. I was just trying to survive the growing swell of rage and grief and numbness that was building with each step I took toward that moment I'd waited for since I was 17 and decided I was done being invisible. When my name was called, Melissa Ray Turner, I heard nothing. Not one clap. Not one whistle. Not a single syllable of approval. Just the mechanical echo of my name rolling off the microphone and dissolving into silence, broken only by the polite, ambient applause that follows every graduate by default. But to me, it was deafening. Not the absence of sound, but the confirmation that I had truly, finally, been left behind. Again. I walked across the stage, kept my eyes forward, shook the dean's hand with a grip strong enough to hide the tremble in my wrist, and forced my mouth into what must have looked like a smile, but felt like a scream pressed flat against my teeth. The diploma folder was lighter than I expected. My whole body felt heavier. And then, just as I turned to walk off the stage, I saw it, that damn Livestream camera mounted at the corner of the platform, its little red light blinking like an accusation. I knew the entire ceremony was being broadcast live for relatives and friends who couldn't attend, which meant that somewhere in the vast nothingness of the internet, someone in my family could have been watching. And in that moment, something inside me snapped, not like a twig breaking in grief, but like a fuse burning down to the last inch before the explosion. I stopped. Right there. I looked directly into the lens, straight into the electronic eye that could be recording or streaming or saving this for some unknown viewer, and I spoke clearly, not loud, not emotional, just sharp, cold, and final. I said, "Thanks for never believing in me." Then I turned, walked down the steps, and didn't look back. It didn't feel dramatic. It didn't feel powerful. It felt necessary, like finishing a sentence you've been building toward your whole life. I didn't check my phone until I was alone in the bathroom stall, gown half unzipped, cap already tossed onto the floor like an afterthought. The notifications were already flooding in: texts, missed calls, messages from people I hadn't heard from in months, maybe years. My aunt had sent 3 crying face emojis, then wrote, "Are you okay? Why would you say that?" My brother sent a voice message that started with, "What the hell is your problem?" and trailed into some attempt at defending their absence with a half-hearted excuse about being busy. My mom, in classic form, just texted, "That was really unnecessary." You made us look bad. I didn't reply to any of them. Not because I didn't have anything to say. God knows I had plenty. But because I realized in that moment that they were finally hearing me, and for once, they couldn't talk over me, couldn't dismiss me, couldn't pretend they didn't hear what I said. It was out there now, etched in digital permanence, caught on camera, echoing through inboxes and group chats, and whatever little corner of the family grapevine still functioned. And I had no intention of clarifying, because I had said enough. More than enough. After a lifetime of silence, all it took was one sentence to pull the rug out from under them, and I was just getting started. There's a certain kind of satisfaction, dark and quiet and almost intoxicating, that comes from watching people who have spent years ignoring you suddenly scramble to piece together a version of the past that makes them look like they cared, like they were involved. Like they didn't actively contribute to the silence that suffocated you for so long that breathing without their approval became second nature. In the hours and days following my graduation, I witnessed something I never thought I would see, my family panicking, not because they missed my big day or because they were suddenly flooded with guilt for the years of indifference and casual cruelty, but because I had dared to say something out loud that they thought I would keep buried forever. That one sentence, delivered cold and unshaken into the Livestream camera, had cracked the perfectly polished illusion they'd built around themselves, an illusion where they were the misunderstood victims and I was just the ungrateful daughter who never fit in and never stopped reminding them of it. They were scrambling because the truth had made it past the front door. And I didn't even have to raise my voice. At first, it was just the messages, endless, whiny, poorly punctuated attempts to do damage control. My mother's text was clinical, almost bureaucratic in its lack of emotion. We didn't think you wanted us there. You've been so distant. No apology, no ownership, just a neat little deflection wrapped in faux concern. My brother's response was more performative. Like everything else he did, several voice notes where he stammered through half-baked explanations about how his car was acting up and how stuff came up that made it impossible to attend, as if I hadn't given them 3 months' notice and a printed invitation. My aunt, the one who used to promise me that I was going to do something big while conveniently disappearing during every actual moment of my life that required support, sent a crying emoji, followed by a message that read, "You didn't have to say it like that, sweetheart." But I did. And deep down, they all knew it. I said nothing back. And the silence, my God, the silence was louder than any response I could have crafted. I let their words hang in the void, unanswered and exposed, because after years of being the one who reached out, who tried to mend things, who tiptoed around their egos just to earn a breadcrumb of basic decency, I realized the most cutting response I could offer was nothing at all. I gave them exactly what they gave me: absence, indifference, quiet dismissal. And it wrecked them. That weekend, I did something I hadn't planned but felt right the moment the idea bloomed in my head. I opened a blank note on my phone, scrolled through years of texts from my family, casual jabs, backhanded compliments, outright dismissals, and screenshotted the worst of them. There were the messages from my brother laughing at my book addiction and asking if I was still trying to be a teacher like some Hallmark movie reject. There were the ones from my mom warning me not to get too full of myself after I posted about passing midterms. One from my aunt, sent the day I got into university, simply said, "Wow. Didn't expect that." No context. No congratulations. Just that passive little jab that, at the time, I'd tried to read generously. Not anymore. I didn't add commentary. I didn't explain anything. I just posted the screenshots to my social media, each with a date and nothing more. No names. No identifiers. But anyone close enough to know would know. Anyone in the family group chat could piece it together. I didn't have to say a word. The internet did the rest. Within hours, the reaction began. People shared the post. Friends commented things like, "This hits too close to home," and "Proud of you for speaking up." Some messaged me privately to say they'd been through the same thing, that their families had also disappeared when it mattered most, that they too had sat through milestones with empty chairs and forced smiles. The posts spread like wildfire, and with each new like, each share, each message of solidarity, my family's grip on the narrative slipped further away. They weren't the concerned, misunderstood parents anymore. They weren't the close-knit clan dealing with a rebellious daughter. They were the people who didn't show up, and that truth didn't need to be shouted, it just needed to be shown. The real shift came when one of my cousin's friends commented, tagging her with a simple, "Aren't these your relatives?" Yikes. That was the domino that knocked the rest over. Suddenly, I was getting indirect shade from distant cousins, passive-aggressive Facebook statuses about how social media ruins families, and vague posts about some people just want attention. But no one dared tag me. No one dared confront me directly. Because they knew. They knew that everything I'd said, everything I'd shown was true. And for once, they couldn't hide behind pleasantries or family photos or Christmas cards filled with fake smiles. Still, they tried. My mom called twice. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail saying, "You're hurting people who love you," and I nearly laughed out loud, not because it was funny, but because the irony of that sentence coming from her was so thick you could bottle it and sell it as perfume. My brother texted me again, this time accusing me of ruining our family's reputation, as if we had one worth preserving, as if their neglect hadn't been chipping away at that reputation for years before I ever picked up a phone to record it. I stayed silent. Every message, every call, every attempt at guilt was met with the same response: nothing. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I used to be. I wasn't screaming into my pillow or writing unsent letters. I was past that. What I felt now was colder, more surgical, the kind of clarity that comes after a storm, when everything is broken but visible. I saw them for what they were. I saw myself for what I had become. And I realized I didn't need to yell. I just needed to keep going. So I did. I started mentoring other students like me, first-generation college kids with families who didn't understand, who laughed when they said they wanted more. I began tutoring again, not for money, but because I saw myself in those tired, hopeful faces. I spoke at a local event for at-risk youth and told my story, carefully, without bitterness, but without censoring the pain. And after the speech, a girl came up to me, maybe 16, and said, "I thought it was just me." And in that moment, I knew I was done chasing their approval. I had built something out of their silence. I had turned it into a platform. And all it took to burn the house of lies they'd lived in for years was one sentence, one camera, and the quiet decision not to go back. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Because the final blow, the one they never saw coming, was still on its way. And I planned to deliver it with the same calm, merciless silence that had once been my prison, but had now become my weapon. There's something oddly poetic about the way life brings things full circle when you've finally stopped waiting for it to do so, how the very people who once held the power to break you with a look, with a word, with the simple, brutal gesture of absence, end up crawling back through back channels and fragile apologies, as if erasing the damage was as simple as typing out a text, hitting send, and assuming forgiveness flows as easily as their guilt now does. But by the time the real fallout began to unfold, by the time the wave of reactions quieted just enough for the messages to take a more desperate, personal tone, I had already crossed into a version of myself they no longer recognized. Someone they hadn't expected to survive, let alone rise, and certainly not in public view, standing taller and speaking louder than they'd ever allowed in their presence. The messages came in batches, first from the outer orbit of the family tree, the aunts and uncles and cousins who always watched from a distance, never close enough to help, but always just near enough to feel entitled to an opinion when things got uncomfortable. They started with the usual phrases that sound like concern, but are really just attempts at salvaging pride. "We didn't know it was that bad. Why didn't you say something sooner?" Family fights, but we're still family. And I read them all with the detached patience of someone reviewing spam, recognizing every word as a tool of deflection, as a coward's attempt to rewrite history without taking any responsibility for the chapters they helped author. Then came my aunt again, this time not through social media but by voicemail, her voice shaking, trying to sound warm, calling me her brilliant girl, like that phrase was supposed to undo a decade of silence and subtle sabotage. She said she hadn't slept since graduation night, that she had rewatched the live stream 3 times, that she didn't know what to say but wanted to say something anyway. She choked up halfway through the message, and for a moment, I almost felt something. Maybe pity, maybe sorrow, maybe the dull ache of memories that didn't turn out the way they should have. But it passed, quickly, drowned beneath the larger truth that regret isn't always the same as love, and tears don't always mean someone is ready to change. Sometimes people cry because their illusion of themselves has cracked, not because they suddenly see you clearly. And then came Jake. My brother's message didn't arrive in text form, because Jake, in his usual melodramatic way, had to make it a production. He sent me a 3-minute voice note, his voice unsteady, his usual arrogance toned down into something almost childlike, as if he suddenly remembered I wasn't just the shadow he'd grown up ignoring, but a real person with a memory sharp enough to recall every single time he laughed when our mother belittled me, every moment he shrugged when I needed defending, every stupid joke he made about my boring little books that I swallowed just to keep the peace. He said he didn't know why I had to make things so public, that he was proud in his own way, that he thought I wanted space, and didn't realize I cared so much. He ended it with a plea, an actual plea for me to call him, to talk, to fix things. But I didn't want to fix things. I wasn't interested in patching over cracks I hadn't made, in holding together the hollow shell of a family dynamic that had failed me again and again while demanding loyalty I was no longer willing to give. Instead, I opened a blank email draft, not to reply, but to pour out the words that had been clawing inside me since childhood, every unsent message I'd written in my mind after every dismissal, every time they let me drown in silence while pretending they didn't see. I wrote about the nights I cried into my textbooks, the birthdays they forgot, the fear of speaking too loud at dinner because I didn't want to be the punchline again. I wrote about the way my mother's eyes glossed over me like I was background noise, how my father's absence shaped the space I never managed to fill, how Jake's casual cruelty wore my self-worth down until I learned to keep it hidden, even from myself. But I never sent it. Because sending it would mean hoping for something in return, understanding, remorse, change, and I no longer needed any of that. Writing it was enough. Letting it sit, unsent, was more powerful than any argument I could start. They could never say I hadn't told them. I had told them, just not in the way they wanted, wrapped in politeness, softened by guilt, diluted with apologies. I had spoken through action, through silence, through that one perfect sentence on the stage, and it echoed louder than any reconciliation could. In the weeks that followed, I continued building the life they never imagined I could have. I accepted a job offer to teach at a charter school for underserved youth, where every student reminded me of a version of myself, quiet, bruised by their own homes, but brilliant, still burning under the surface. I moved into a small apartment with peeling paint, but big windows and enough light to read by. I surrounded myself with people who asked how my day was without expecting anything in return. I started living like I had nothing to prove, and that, in itself, was the sweetest kind of revenge. But the last twist, the one I never saw coming, arrived in the form of an envelope, thick, cream-colored, with a law firm's letterhead stamped neatly at the top. I almost didn't open it, assuming it was some error or a student loan complication, but inside was a formal notice informing me that my father, who had died 3 months prior, a fact I hadn't been told because apparently that news hadn't made the rounds in the family chat, had named me in his will. Not just named me, but left me a significant sum of money, far more than I ever expected he'd have to give. The catch? To receive it, I had to sign a public statement acknowledging my family, affirming our bond, and retracting what I had said during the graduation livestream. In other words, I could have the money, but only if I lied. Only if I made them whole again in the eyes of the world. Only if I took back the truth. I stared at that letter for a long time, not because I was tempted by the offer, though the amount would have erased my debt, paid for a car, maybe even bought me a down payment, but because I realized how desperate they were to restore the story, to make the ending palatable. And I knew then, without hesitation, what I would do. I closed my laptop. I made myself a cup of tea. I walked to the balcony, watched the sun drop behind the buildings, and let the letter sit unopened on the kitchen table. I didn't burn it. I didn't tear it apart. I left it there, untouched, because some offers aren't worth answering. And if anyone asks, if years from now someone wonders why I never took the chance, why I turned down the one olive branch they extended, I'll tell them this. Some bridges are built so crooked that walking back across them will only lead you into fire. Some families don't need healing. They need forgetting. And me? I've already walked away. I'm not looking back.